Good evening, everyone, or rather good afternoon, forgive me. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Charles Tang, and I have the pleasure of serving as the director of the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School. The center is very proud to host this screening of the new PBS documentary on Henry David Thoreau, and we're delighted to welcome you all in person and online. The timing of this documentary's release couldn't be more fortuitous. This year, the center has launched a new Transcendentalism initiative on the conviction that Transcendentalism is a living tradition whose rich history, diverse representatives, and contemporary exemplars offer today's world enormous resources for reimagining how we might relate differently to ourselves, to each other, to our work, labor, and play, and to our words. And finally, how we are all immersed in, if alienated from, a vivid and vibrant more than human world, a mysterious melange of nature and spirit. Perhaps unexpectedly, given his relative obscurity during the heyday of Transcendentalism, Henry David Thoreau has emerged as the most prominent face and voice of this living tradition. He, having slowly and only posthumously stepped out of the shadow of his mentor, Ralph Waldo Emerson. There are many more men and women of the movement to celebrate than these two. Of course, chief among them, Margaret Fuller, who is sometimes said to complete a kind of transcendentalist triumvirate. But today we're here to consider Henry and to honor the release of this documentary by engaging with it with the help of three eminent scholars. If you're interested in learning more about the Center's Transcendentalism initiative, I invite you to look at the handout included in your program. And if you're interested, sign up for our newsletter. We're nearing the end of our academic year's offerings, but there will be plenty of events next year in Cambridge and perhaps also in Concord. Before we go any further, I have one reminder and then several people to thank. First, the reminder. Please take the time right now to ensure that your cell phone is silenced or turned off. We can do it. We really can, team. Let's have an event where let's have a screening where we don't have a single cell phone call, alarm bell, or visitation from Siri or some other digital agent. Do it now, please. I'm going to do it myself. Here I am, turning my phone. It's on silent. Okay, I'm modeling it. So, thank you. Please take that time to invest a moment to ensure in the gift of silence. Okay, now some gratitude. I would like to thank the staff at the Carpenter Center for Visual Arts for the use of this beautiful theater. I'd like to thank the filmmakers and the scholars, whom I will soon introduce, for agreeing to do this event and for their flexibility and patience as we struggled to land a date. I'd like to thank the CSWR Executive Director, Gosia Skladowska, who led the effort to herd all of us cats, and with great patience, determination, and humor. And finally, I would like to thank the other members of the wonderful CSWR team with whom I have the pleasure of working every week. Bashwar Khan, Laurie Sedgwick, and Sarah Iannotti. An event of this scale is not easy, and they have been working tirelessly to see it to completion. So please join me in thanking them. Laurie. So here's how this evening will unfold. I will soon welcome to the podium Erik Ewers, who, together with his brother Christopher Loren Ewers, are the co-directors of this documentary. Erik and Christopher have worked together for years, including on the recent PBS film Hiding in Plain Sight, which focuses on the crisis of mental health in this country. The first film focusing on youth, and the forthcoming on adult mental health. Erik will introduce the documentary, and Christopher will appear near the end of our program for the panel discussion, along with producer Susan Shumaker, who also happens to be an alumna of Harvard Divinity School. We have with us this afternoon both directors and one of the producers, therefore, so you'll hear the filmmakers' perspective. After Erik's introduction, we will hear from Jennifer Ishii, the curator and library administrator of the Walden Woods Project. She'll tell us about the amazing work they've accomplished in recent decades, what work remains to be done, and how you can learn more and get involved. Then we'll have the screening. Following the screening, we'll hear from three eminent scholars of Thoreau, whom I'm going to introduce now. So this is the last, I'm doing all the introductions now and briefly. So we will hear first from Rebecca Kneale Gould, who is Associate Professor of Environmental Studies at Middlebury College and author of the 2005 classic, At Home in Nature, Modern Homesteading and Spiritual Practice in America. Rebecca is an alumna of our GSAS PhD program. Rebecca will be followed by Jeffrey C. Cramer, who was for many years the curator at the Walden Woods Project, and whom I like to think of as the living library of all things Thoreauvian. Among his many books are a series of fully annotated editions of Walden, the Maine Woods, and Thoreau's selected essays and journals. These editions are a boon for lay readers and scholars alike. Jeff will be followed by John Kucich, professor of English at Bridgewater State University and author most recently of Unsettling Thoreau, Native Americans, Settler Colonialism, and the Power of Place, published in 2004 by the University of Massachusetts Press. John is also currently serving as the president of the Thoreau Society. I'm sorry, I just mispronounced it, Thoreau. I tried to get through the whole remarks by... No one really knows, Rebecca tells me. Okay, great, thank you, Rebecca. All three of these scholars are a part of the Center's Transcendentalism initiative, and I'd like to thank them for their counsel, their support, and the deep knowledge they bring to our effort. You will also see Rebecca and John featured in the documentary. All right, after these three short presentations, I'll invite the speakers and the filmmakers to the stage for a panel discussion. I'm going to ask 2, maybe 3 questions to get the conversation started, and then I will invite questions and comments from the audience. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and, crucially, wait for a microphone to get to you. This is not only for the benefit of the people in this room who may have difficulty hearing you, but for the people online who will only be able to hear you if you are speaking into a microphone. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Erik Ewers, one of the co-directors. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Charles. And I have to start by saying I so badly want to say good evening. Chris and I have been on the road, so to speak, doing a bunch of premieres for this film. And there's a lot that we've been saying to the crowd at the beginning. And I think today, in the spirit of this event, I wanted to talk about something a little bit differently, to approach him differently. I'd like to talk about what Thoreau means to me, and also perhaps what he could mean for you as well. Henry David Thoreau famously wrote, "I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms, and if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole genuine meanness of it, and publish its meanness to the world, or if it were sublime, to know it by experience, and be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion." In those words, I believe we find Thoreau's ultimate pursuit as a human being determined to discover life's ultimate truths. For my brother Chris and I, these words also align with our premise in filmmaking. We too strive to suck out all the marrow of life and to depict it in all of its meanness and wonder, and then to provide a true account of it to the world. In our films, we capture the heartfelt stories of people both famous and unknown, living today and from centuries ago. I personally live with these voices daily, sometimes for years in the editing room, and they have given me insights I never imagined possible. There, in the editing room, I fully realized that Thoreau's life and writings embody my own ongoing search to find out who I really am or who I hope to be. There in the editing room, I began changing the trajectory of my life. This personal journey began in 2019 when Chris and I were filming our PBS miniseries, Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness. We conducted 23 on-camera interviews with young people, ages 11 to 27, from all over the country and all walks of life. What they shared with us was raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal. Listening to their stories, many of which they had never even shared with their own parents, I began to recognize something that I had long misunderstood in me: a crippling anxiety and a volatility that had been hiding in plain sight my entire lifetime. It was the lasting effects of my own emotionally challenged upbringing, brought to life through these young people. But through their honesty and indescribable hope, I suddenly found myself thrust onto a new path, one leading towards self-discovery and healing. It was a path I never knew I needed, and it came to me when I needed it the most. Our next film project was Henry David Thoreau, and there could not have been a better subject to shine a light on my own search for truth. Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson introduced me and my brother to Transcendentalism, not as a philosophy, but as a lived experience. Witnessing how Thoreau shaped it into something uniquely his own inspired me to rediscover a kind of spark in myself, something meaningful and affirming that I had somehow lost over my lifetime. Over the many years writing and editing this film, I sat with Thoreau. I went on his life's journey with him. Along the way, he taught me that healing is not only found in the more memorable and impactful moments, but in the quiet, unassuming ones, walking on the wooded, dead-end road past my house, sitting each morning on the porch with my wife, reading a daily devotional, surrounded by the wild nature of my front yard, or simply sitting in stillness alone inside. Thoreau taught me the importance of balance between those moments of peace and the pull of what he called our quiet desperation. He reminded me that without making a deliberate effort to seek the truth every day, both externally and internally, it is nearly impossible to live a life of purpose and joy. Thoreau demonstrated the power of individuality, the courage to march to the beat of your own drummer, and how one person's convictions and actions can ripple outward to influence others. To me, spiritually, he is Christian, agnostic, atheist, Buddhist, Hindu, and lover of nature. To me, his enlightened self always seemed to be one step ahead of himself. And he opened my eyes to the quiet miracles that surround us every day in the exacting patterns of a single leaf, in the death of autumn and the renewal of spring. I am reminded how we are inseparably interconnected with the natural world. We are made of the same matter, and therefore we must be responsible for its care. In making this film, Thoreau has brought me closer than ever to becoming the person I always sensed I could be. And yet, if he has taught me anything, it is this: that life's many explorations never end. Every conclusion I come to must be questioned. Every truth I discover must be re-examined again and again. But most importantly, every truth must be lived. Through the unparalleled talent of Jeff Goldblum, Ted Danson, Meryl Streep, Tate Donovan, and George Clooney, as well as the poignant commentary of our esteemed colleagues, some of who are here today, we invite our audience to walk alongside Thoreau, to grow as he grows, to question as he questions, and to experience the revelations he experiences that define his writing and his life. We hope you will discover the true Henry David Thoreau, but we also hope we have created a reflection where you can see yourself. He once wrote that Walden Pond is Earth's eye, into which the beholder measures the depth of his own nature. Walden Pond is no longer just a place. It is a perspective for all of us. Perhaps by watching our film and witnessing his pursuit of the life that he wanted to live, you too may choose to begin or continue your own search. But as writer Drew Lanham reminds us of Thoreau's wisdom, it is up to us to open his books and read. Today we are presenting episode 2, Being Alive, chronicling the 2 years he spent at Walden Pond, transforming his life and his writing. The prior episode, titled Who Are We?, tells the story of his life before Walden, growing up in a young country struggling to live up to its own ideals, one where he witnessed most people living lives of quiet desperation. As episode 1 ends, Henry has failed as a career writer. His dear brother John died suddenly of tetanus. And not knowing how to move forward, he considers a bold experiment to build a small house on the shore of Walden Pond, step away from society, and write. I hope today's presentation will prompt you to watch our entire 3-part documentary series on PBS. It's now streaming. It had broadcasted a few days ago. So I hope we've intrigued you enough to continue the pursuit of Henry David Thoreau. Thank you.
Good afternoon. The Walden Woods Project is a nonprofit founded in 1990 by recording artist Don Henley, who is the co-executive producer of this film. The Walden Woods Project was founded in order to preserve the land around Walden Pond that was being threatened by commercial development. Our mission is to preserve the land, literature, and legacy of Thoreau. Today, we continue to pursue conservation in the area surrounding Walden Pond, which is still threatened by development. Within a few years of its inception, the Walden Woods Project Library in Lincoln, Massachusetts was established and is today, thanks to the curatorial efforts of one Jeff Cramer, the most extensive special collections library, is the most extensive special collections library for materials related to Thoreau and his contemporaries in the Transcendentalist movement. Additionally, we are the repository for the organizational collections of the Thoreau Alliance, the Emerson Society, and the Margaret Fuller Society. We are open to the public Monday through Friday and welcome visitors and scholars, and we frequently host school groups anywhere from middle school to graduate students. We also run a robust education department that welcomes students, teachers, and groups from all over the country, hosts literary walking tours through the woods surrounding Walden Pond, conducts writing contests for middle school and high schoolers, and holds a week-long intensive training seminar for educators in the summer. In collaboration with PBS Learning Media, the Walden Woods Project helped to create educator and student resources for the Ken Burns in the Classroom collection, which is online and based on the Thoreau film. The resources are for middle and high school humanities and science classrooms. Resource topics include the importance of observing and describing nature, Walden's influence on living simply today, and the legacy of Thoreau's civil disobedience. And you can find those resources on PBS Learning Media. We welcome any of you to visit our campus or our library. You can find out more about us at walden.org. We hope you enjoy this film. Thank you.
I'm going to invite you, if you want to stand up as I'm speaking. Like if you need a seventh inning stretch to make it to the next part, please feel free. And Charlie, am I right? I can just plunge in here? Yes, okay. Also, I wanted I like handouts, so I made one for you. It's in your program. And if that will help you to sort of follow along with what I'm saying, feel free to consult it or just take it home as something you can meditate on. So thank you for coming. I'm sorry to be the one who has to take you out of the 19th century and back into this world where we are, but I think all of us here will have a conversation that will be very lively and helpful for you. So before I launch into the substance of my brief remarks, I just want to thank, I was ready to look at you here, but you're here now. Thank Erik and Chris and Susan and Collie and David and the entire Ewers Brothers team for bringing Henry David Thoreau to us through such a beautiful, captivating, and relevant film. And I can't say enough how much we need this film right now. In the limited time that I have to speak this afternoon, I thought I would simply elaborate on 3 Thoreauvian themes: spaciousness, grief, and enchantment. And each theme is keyed to one of the episodes. Spaciousness is keyed to episode 2, which you've just seen. One of my long-standing preoccupations has been a quest for spaciousness, both in my own life and in the life of American culture more broadly, where it is tragically lacking. Starting in the early 2000s, I began lecturing on this topic in earnest, blending, as Thoreau often does, the scholarly with the sermonic. My starting point was often the Corn in the Night passage, and that full passage is there on the handout, that the film renders so exquisitely in the early part of episode 2. I love that the filmmakers dare to slow down in this section so that viewers themselves can experience the sacred pause that Thoreau so often celebrates in his work. I grew in those seasons like corn in the night, Thoreau proclaims in the Sounds chapter of Walden, and they were far better than any work of the hands would have been. It was morning, and lo, now it is evening, and nothing memorable is accomplished. He crows a bit later, playfully turning the Genesis creation story on its head. A few moments still later, evoking the superfluous, enervating hyperproductivity of the village, Thoreau adds by way of false apology, "This was sheer idleness to my fellow townsmen, no doubt. But if the birds and flowers had tried me by their standard, I should not have been found wanting." Of course, Thoreau is scarcely truly idle. He walks, he observes, he surveys, he records, he charts, he reads relentlessly and hungrily, and he writes and writes and writes. What he doesn't do, however, is rush or juggle or multitask. Thoreau stays devoutly attentive to the present moment, attuned to the slow unfolding of the water lily in the sun, riveted to the raucous exhortations of the partying frogs come evening. At times in his journal, Thoreau reprimands himself when he catches his own attentiveness starting to flag. He also gives himself a hard time when he starts drinking tea and coffee, and then he's like, no, I can't, transcendentalists don't do that. As with any spiritual practice, the practitioner sometimes falls away from himself and has to recommit. What I particularly love about this film is how the directors and producers take up the cause of spaciousness. The team, in essence, carries forward Thoreau's call by providing direct experiences of spaciousness throughout the narrative. I'm sure you all had those just now. Thoreau's words, the cinematography, the music, the set design, everything conspires to provide the audience with short moments of spaciousness that feel long and luscious. In this way, we are exhorted to go seek such moments for ourselves. This is Thoreau's gift to us and is a gift of the film as well. Grief. Here I'm talking about episode 1. How many of you seen episode 1, just out of curiosity? Okay, that helps. It was strikingly late in my long association with Henry when I first learned the tragic story of the death of his older brother and best friend, John. On the 1st of January of 1842, John cut his finger while stropping his razor and ultimately contracted tetanus, a fatal illness. He died in his brother's arms on January 11th. Shortly afterward, Henry David also developed the symptoms of tetanus, but there was no infection actually present. Modern medicine uses the sterile term conversion disorder to describe what transpired in Henry's body. We might characterize it better as a striking form of soul sickness formed in the crucible of loss. Here is how Henry describes his experience to his friend Isaiah Williams. And this is a letter he wrote March 14th, 1842, so about 2 months after John has died. "I've been confined to my chamber for a month with a prolonged shock of the same disorder from close attention to and sympathy with him, which I learn is not without precedent." Then a little later he adds, "For my own part, I feel I could not have done without this experience." When I read that line once, I was just like, oh my God. It's a lot to take in, what he says there. I could not have done without this experience. It's almost as if he appreciates what happened. As the film tells us, Thoreau goes to Walden Woods in part to carve out the time and space to write what will become A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, an extended elegy to his brother John, retelling the tale of their 1839 boat excursion through the narrative frames of epic and myth. In my early years of reading Walden, I was already drawn to Thoreau's response to the question of why he embarked on his experience, and you by now have heard this passage many times. "I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Some have dismissed these sentences as the youthful, idealistic ravings of an earnest 20-something who wants to ensure that he's not wasting his life on trivialities. Of course, youthful earnestness does run rampant through Walden, in the first 2 chapters especially. But when viewed through the lens of grief and loss, these sentences resonate with so much more depth and complexity. Having already had to temporarily withdraw from Harvard in 1836 because of an illness that might have been, likely was, the first flares of tuberculosis, Thoreau, he's not only grieving John, he knows that his life too may well be short. A few sentences later in the famous Live Deliberately passage, Thoreau speaks of wishing, quote, to cut a broad swath and shave close to drive life into a corner. Is he using the metaphor of scything or of shaving? I'm not sure, but his brother's razor feels not very far away. If films could have appendices, are you listening, Chris and Erik? If films could have appendices, here's one I would love to see and hear. I'd like to know when, how, and where many of my friends and colleagues who appear in the film first learned the story of John's death and of Thoreau's experience in the days that followed. I want to know how learning that story shaped or changed their reading and experience of Walden, and perhaps their experience of their own lives. Thoreau never tells us directly in Walden that his 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days constitute, in part, a project of engaging loss. But we can hear the strains when we pay attention, particularly when we discover the many places where Thoreau's sense of kinship with nature is evoked, when he speaks of being companioned and befriended by the natural world, when he claims that there can be, quote, no very black melancholy for one who is attuned to nature and has his senses still. We sense that Thoreau's been there with the black melancholy. In many ways, Thoreau teaches us how to grieve and gives us permission to do so. My third and last theme, each of these are micro discussions, of course. I use the word enchantment. I'm actually talking about science and the science-enchantment nexus. So I just mentioned Thoreau's sense of kinship with the natural world and how that sense of kinship is likely connected to his experiences of grief and loss. His understanding of nature as kin has also mediated his sense of alienation from the social worlds that he inhabited, worlds defined by getting and spending and staying awash in the breaking news of the day, the conveyance of which was speeded up by both the trains and the telegraph. We always think, what would he be thinking now? But I would not want to suggest that this sense of kinship is largely a matter of compensation. Thoreau's sense of kinship with nature also just is. It's no surprise then that Thoreau's life as a scientist was a complicated one, and that Thoreau's legacy as a scientist has been off and on a hot topic in Thoreau scholarship. Some readers of Thoreau are quick to argue that he grew out of his early transcendentalism. Let's leave that mystical stuff behind, they seem to be saying, as if elevating Thoreau as an innovative scientist, which he certainly was, will somehow help boost his legitimacy in the STEM-dominant, ecologically disastrous times that we're in. The challenge of bringing Thoreau to life by way of a documentary is that conveying a long history of scholarly argument would definitely kill the narrative. And fear not, I'm not going to convey that history right now either. But I just want to bring this question a little bit to the fore through a few quotations. I simply want to underline the ways in which Thoreau, again, is complex and self-contradictory. And aren't we all? While Thoreau collected specimens for Louis Agassiz and kept up with scientific journals, he was also deeply ambivalent about the professionalization of science, or what some would call scientism. Now, that word wasn't there in the 19th century, but I think that's what he was talking about. It is impossible for the same person to see things from the poet's point of view and that of the man of science, Thoreau concludes in his journal on February 18, 1852. The poet's second love may be that of science, but not his first. Earlier in that same passage, however, Thoreau wonders aloud about whether he could somehow master a way of perceiving and writing that would somehow overcome this distance. There are many distances that he wants to overcome. Could a true poet somehow merge poetry and fact-keeping into a single book? Let me offer now a somewhat thicker example of the complexity of Thoreau's self-understanding as a poet and a scientist. This is the last little example I'll give. And this is from a journal entry in 1858, so this is comparatively late in his short life. Thoreau's musing upon the bream, a species of fish that he discovered in Walden Pond. And I'll just say, I was saying to Jeff, Cramer and I were talking earlier, I'm sure I read this passage before, but several weeks ago when I was reading around in the journal, this passage struck me in a way it never had. So I decided I needed to bring it to you. I cannot but see still in my mind's eye those little striped breams poised in Walden's glaucous water. They balance all the rest of the world in my estimation. A little later, I can only poise my thought there by its side and try to think like a bream for a moment. The bream, appreciated, floats in the pond as the center of the system, another image of God. Its life no man can explain more than he can explain his own. I want you to perceive the mystery of the bream. I have a contemporary in Walden. It has fins where I have legs and arms. I have a friend among the fishes. In many ways, and I encourage you to, when you get home, look at that whole passage because there's so much more in there. In so many ways, this is a stunning passage. It's a statement of radical kinship. It's a venture into what we now would call ecological theology. Thinking like a bream precedes Aldo Leopold's essay, Thinking Like a Mountain, by almost 100 years, and it anticipates Rachel Carson's insistence that a sense of wonder should always drive the work of conservation and scientific inquiry. Thoreau, the scientist, remains in constant conversation with Thoreau, the poet, and Thoreau, the spiritual seeker. This legacy, too, has something to teach us. And with that, I will pass the buck, the baton, over to Jeff.
Hello. I don't have themes. For people who have heard me speak before, I am kind of rambling, so get ready for some rambles. And so I'd like to read you some of my somewhat disjointed notes and thoughts from when I first got to view the documentary. This film is welcome. This film is needed. And this film comes at just the right time in our world, although, frankly and somewhat sadly, Thoreau's words are always needed and always come at the right time, because we as human beings fail to progress. Has anyone seen the movie Defending Your Life by Albert Brooks? Yeah, thank you. All right, here we go. It came out in 1991, and some of you remember 1991, right? Yeah. In this movie, when a person dies, they have to defend their lives to determine if they can move on to a higher level of existence or have to go back to Earth to try again. And I think so many of us would keep getting sent back to Earth to try again at being better human beings. But I think this documentary does a truly great job at showing us how we don't pay attention and how we must pay attention if we want to save the world through saving our own humanity. I've often been asked the question, What would Thoreau say if he came back? And I really don't like to answer the what would Thoreau say question, because no one could ever predict what Thoreau would say. Thoreau himself couldn't predict what he would say. No one reading Civil Disobedience could predict the John Brown essays. But sometimes I do answer the question, and what I say is this. If Thoreau were to come back, he would likely say something to the effect of, I told you 175 years ago how to conduct your lives, and you haven't made much progress. I crowed like Chanticleer, and you turned a deaf ear. Now look at you. I've been studying the life of Thoreau for a lot longer than he lived it. I am bookish, I am a nerd, and I am an introvert. And for a good portion of my life, there was nothing more terrifying than talking to people, let alone a group of people. But when I started working at the Walden Woods Project as a curator is defined in my head as some sort of Dickensian character sitting amidst a pile of books and manuscripts and being left alone. Who knew I'd have to answer the door and let people in? And worse, that I'd have to teach groups of students and adults about Thoreau. But then something happened. I began to enjoy it. And here was this dreaded, dead white male author who most students didn't want to read or hear about, and most adults remembered as the guy who wrote that horrid book, Walden, they had to read in high school, or who was a hypocrite, or who was self-righteous, or who lived off his family and friends, and who wrote in some really difficult language that sounded like English, but which they couldn't quite understand. And I got to make them see a different Thoreau. I got them to hear what he was trying to say and how relevant it was to their lives. I got to see a student's face light up when they understood that the paths prescribed by them by their parents and teachers and society was just one path, not the only path, and that they did not have to spend the next 60 years of their lives in quiet desperation, hating their jobs and their choices. I got to hear from adults who disliked Thoreau for a variety of reasons, say they were going to try reading him again. I literally had a woman come up to me once before a conference and say, "You're that Thoreau guy, right? I really hate Thoreau." So why am I telling you this? What has this got to do with the film we were just watching? It's because that is what the Ewers brothers film does. It opens up and makes something sometimes difficult, this difficult figure, accessible and interesting and even appealing. I love the human Henry David Thoreau, not the iconic one. When Emerson was putting together a volume of his letters after he died, his sister Sophia was disappointed to find that some of the passages betraying her brother's natural affection had been omitted by Emerson. At the close of a particularly beautiful letter to Mrs. Emerson, Henry had written, "Shake a day-day to Edith and say goodnight to Ellen for me." I don't know what a day-day is. Ultimately, it was included, but Sophia said, had this ending been omitted, the world might never have known how much he loved babies and children. I've known the Ewers for nearly a decade now and have so much respect for the work they do, the integrity of the work, the regard they have for their subject of whatever film they're creating. And I think this film works towards presenting us with a more nuanced, therefore more complex, human Thoreau, and that is so important. If our heroes are iconic, if they don't stumble or err, how can we ordinary mortals hope to emulate them? We're at a disadvantage. We're human. But if our heroes are the same as you and me, then we have a chance. I've often told students that it is okay if we fail to live up to those mighty Thoreauvian ideals. Thoreau didn't live up to them either. There's an old joke among Thoreauvians that Thoreau spent half his life at Walden and half his life in jail, because that's really all most people know about him. But thanks to Erik and Chris for giving us a more well-rounded and complete picture of his life. Many years ago now, I was editing a book called The Quotable Thoreau, which is a whole bunch of quotations, as you'd expect by the title, of Thoreau. And I was trying to organize it and try to figure out exactly what I wanted to do to organize these incredible writings by Thoreau and how I wanted to put them in order. And then I started thinking about what was the most important thing for me in Thoreau's writings. And I realized that it was questions. I don't go to Thoreau for answers, I go for questions. And I realized that through every single work he ever wrote, he's asking questions. He asks literal questions with question marks in the text, both to his writers and to himself. And so I realized that was the most important thing for me. Edward Abbey wrote an essay called Down the River with Henry Thoreau. In it, he described his thoughts as he read his old, worn copy of Walden while going down a river in Utah. And Wendell Berry described Abbey's essay this way. He said, "It is an essay in the literal sense, a trial. Mr. Abbey tries himself against Thoreau, and Thoreau against himself. He tries himself and Thoreau against the river. He tries himself and Thoreau and the river against modern times, and vice versa." This is the value of Thoreau or any great writer. Thoreau is a writer against whom we should try ourselves, not should, but against whom we must try ourselves, because he forces us to ask those questions we do not necessarily want to hear. And this is exactly what the film does. It gives us the opportunity to question, to look at Thoreau's various stages of his life, and to look at our own lives in comparison. Martin Buber, the philosopher, put it this way for the centennial of Thoreau's death. He addressed his readers in such a way that the reader not only discovered why Thoreau acted as he did, but also that the reader, assuming him, of course, to be honest and dispassionate, would have to act in just such a way whenever the proper occasion arose, provided he was seriously engaged in fulfilling his existence as a human person. I love that. Seriously engaged in fulfilling his existence as a human person. That's where Buber challenges us. That's because who wouldn't want to fulfill his existence as a human person? Walden, for instance, is not a philosophical tract of unattainable goals, but a relatively simple guide for the perplexed, in which Thoreau asks the questions, who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? And how am I supposed to conduct my life? And this film makes us ask those same questions. Emerson told Thoreau that he was told that the landscape looks fairer when we turn our heads upside down and look backwards through our legs. Transcendentalist, right? Differing positions, differing ways of looking at or seeing Thoreau. Thoreauvians by nature are a group of individuals who celebrate their individuality by having their own very individual interpretation of Thoreau and then sharing them with other individualistic Thoreauvians. And this is one of the magnificent things this film offers in its diversity of speakers. Each of the interviewees, and what an incredible list of scholars and writers there is, sees a different Thoreau. And this, when all is said and done, and all 3 episodes have been watched, and maybe watched again, should and will, I hope, make one question who Thoreau was. This film is an introduction, an intelligent and accessible one, and one, thanks to Chris's cinematography, an absolutely beautiful one. And as such, it has done what it has set out to do, and done it very well. If the viewer says at the end, while watching the credits roll, I want to read Walden again, or read it for the first time. I want to read The Maine Woods. I want to read Civil Disobedience, and then does it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm John Kucich. Very happy to be here. Thank you, Jeff. And I'll say Jeff's editions of Thoreau's books are really treasures. Becky, thanks for your comments. Charles, Gosia, your whole team. What a wonderful event, and what a treat to be part of this Ewers Brothers production. It's been one of the honors of a lifetime. In my role as co-president of the Thoreau Alliance, a global community of Thoreauvians based in Thoreau's birthplace in Concord, I keep a careful eye on the state of Thoreau in the cultural conversation in Massachusetts, across the US, and around the world. I'm always a bit nervous when new folks want to tell the story of someone we care so deeply about, particularly when they have a lot of cultural power, and the Ewers brothers and the Ken Burns team certainly do. I wish they had more, but they have a lot. I needn't have worried. They did their homework, talking with a wide range of senior and new scholars, as well as writers and activists who brought a wealth of perspectives and insights. What an impressive crew. Most impressive to me was what they chose not to tell the story of Thoreau as a burnished saint of social justice, spiritual seeking, or environmentalism, but told the story of a very rich, real, complicated human, grappling with issues that resonate with our world without shoehorning them into our contemporary discourse. They told a story that speaks to all of us trying to figure out how to live, how to write, how to act in a broken, beautiful world. My own encounter with Thoreau began as a teenager in a high school English class. I hope yours did too. I'm an English teacher. I was navigating my parents' goals for me, some combination of business, law, Catholicism, and golf. I failed them in many ways, and my own dawning sense that there were other ways of building a life. As a young high school teacher, I was very quickly disabused of the idea that my students would automatically share my enthusiasm for Walden. As a young scholar, I tried, without success, to squeeze him into a dissertation on spiritualism in America. And years later, I returned to Thoreau and found traction with a different project. This began with a very real question for me. What's it mean to call New England, to call America home? How does my own sense of belonging fit alongside particularly Native people who have struggled to maintain their claim on their ancestral land? I plan to explore a number of cross-cultural encounters situated in resonant environments, writers negotiating their ties to an uneasily shared land. One chapter would focus on Henry Thoreau and the Penobscot writer Joseph Nicolar, who gathered together and published in 1893 the vast traditional lore that Thoreau's two Penobscot guides, Joseph Addian and Joseph Polis, knew so well. This project led to a conference paper, then an essay in the Thoreau Society journal, then an invitation to take part in a canoe trip, retracing Thoreau's 1857 journey through the Maine woods. There I got to meet a host of contemporary guides and wilderness advocates, a committed group of Thoreau scholars, and a truly inspiring number of Penobscot leaders, scholars, and educators, including James Francis, who finished all my sentences in this film. This was a rich community indeed, and I found there was much more to do. And so I began exploring other aspects of Thoreau's long, complicated, and very ambivalent relationship with Native America. Reading all the major works with this question in mind, poring over the journal, and reading the vast and understudied Indian notebooks. The scholarship on this somewhat neglected question has been divided between those who saw Thoreau as a great friend of the Indians, who would have written a powerful book on their behalf had he lived past his 44th year, and those who saw him as hopelessly enmeshed in the ideology of savagism, forever seeing Native people through the lens that was often romanticized but always racist. My own view took firmer shape as I researched and talked with a wide range of people, from scholars I deeply admired, including Jeff and Becky, to a number of Native scholars, James Francis, Linda Coombs, Jean O'Brien, Lisa Brooks, to name a few. There are many others, whose generosity and patience has put me deeply in their debt. I found there was truth to both positions, and indeed they were bound together. Thoreau showed an intense, respectful interest in the Native cultures he studied, recognized the grim toll of colonization, and was convinced his own culture very much needed to learn what they had to teach. He recognized the limits of his published sources and sought out Native guides in Maine who could teach him something of their world in the heart of their own homeland. And yet he often saw Native people as racially distinct and bound inevitably to vanish. I'll share a few quick quotes that aren't in the film that capture his attitude. I'll put on my best Jeff Goldblum here. From Natural History of Massachusetts in 1844. The most scientific will still be the healthiest and friendliest man and possess a more perfect Indian wisdom. From Katahdin in 1848, watching Joseph Neptune turn into the river where he's paddling down, there turns up but now into the mouth of Millinocket stream a still more ancient and primitive man. He is but dim and misty to me, obscured by the aeons that lie between the bark canoe and the bateau. He glides up the Millinocket and is lost to my sight, as a more distant and misty cloud is seen flitting by behind a nearer, and is lost in space. So he goes about his destiny, the red face of man. From the Allagash in West Branch in 1857, this is when he's with Joe Polis. Nature must have made 1,000 revelations to them which are still secrets to us. One revelation has been made to the Indian, another to the white man. I have much to learn of the Indian, nothing of the missionary. I am not sure, but all that would tempt me to teach the Indian my religion would be his promise to teach me his. From the journal in 1859, the fact is, the history of the white man is a history of improvement, that of the red man a history of fixed habits of stagnation. And then from the journal, again in 1859, it is the spirit of humanity, that which animates both the so-called savages and civilized nations working through a man, and not the man himself, that interests us most. The thought of a so-called savage tribe is generally far more just than that of a single civilized man. And that whiplash is characteristic throughout Thoreau's work, and that's what I was puzzling over. Thoreau thought deeply about America's indigenous past. It was crucial to his own understanding of what it meant to call Concord, Mesquitequid, home. Because of this, I suggest he found it difficult to talk about the indigenous present. He ignored Native communities in his own state that were doing the hard work of adapting to the modern colonial world, and he never fully advocated for their political rights, even as he grew increasingly radical in his opposition to slavery. Thoreau was, I suggest, caught in his own complicity, advocating for the wisdom of Native culture on behalf of the settler world that had supplanted them. Thoreau wanted to learn from Native people how to live deeply, mindfully, ethically in place, to use traditional ecological knowledge, to build a world in which the human and more than human community could thrive, to thwart the worst excesses of a colonial capitalist world he could intuit and that we can see in increasingly grim detail. But he couldn't fully imagine Native people sharing this world with him. If I've learned anything from this project, it's that we must. I'm grateful for the Ewers brothers team, Chris, Erik, Susan, everybody else who I wish I got to know better, for making Native people so central to this film, for asking all the hard questions, for exploring with such an open mind and open heart, for making Thoreau's relentless search for truth, his devotion to principle, his very human shortcomings so very real. He reminded us that we don't turn to long-dead writers for answers to our own problems, but to help us better see how we can make our own troubled, broken world a bit better. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, Jeff, and John. So we're going to move into the panel discussion now. I have 2 questions for our panelists, and then we will invite questions and comments from you all. Once again, I want to remind you that when it comes time to speak, please wait for a microphone to reach you before posing your question. So, my first question is for our filmmakers. A film, like a book, can only be so long. So every filmmaker, like every author, has to wrestle with what to include and what to leave aside. Susan, Chris, Erik, my question to you is simply, what are you most proud of having included in the documentary and why? And what was the most painful sacrifice you had to make and why?
I'll take the former.
Oh.
Yeah. I think that, for me at least, this narrative, when I walked away from Henry in high school, knowing him very incompletely as, this prophetic hermit that lived his entire life on the shores of, some obscure pond, pondering his navel. And that's, it did not only me, but Henry such a disservice, right? I think that in the reintroduction of Henry to me and to Erik and to all of us on our team, I think that understanding that he was a product in large part of the people in his life and the environment, the circumstances of his life. And I think that for me, one of the most important themes of the film is that he did not do this on his own, that he was inspired and influenced heavily by the former inhabitants, the African American society in and around Concord, by the indigenous peoples of both Massachusetts and Maine, and certainly by the incredibly powerful women in his life. His sisters, his mother, they were all pivotal in the creation of the Concord Free the female Concord Female Free Anti-Slavery Society, CFAS. I've been saying it as CFAS forever now. I can't. But you know, there were these outside influences that allowed this man, this dead white man, to fully embrace and flesh out the experiment that was his life. You know, I think that he recognized that it was his responsibility and his privilege too, and ultimately the same for us, to be able throughout his life to reevaluate his choices, his values, his morals, to check his compass, you know, to change course when things stopped feeling right, you know, and I think that is something that I wish I had learned about him when I was first introduced to him. Not that I had the road under my feet, the life experience to really understand, I don't think. But having been reintroduced to him now, I think that is one of the major points for me for the film is to create this space in which the audience can get to know the real Henry, and get to know, as someone said earlier, to be able to relate to him as the same as us, as complicated, as contradictory, you know, because I think that when we put him on or we put anything, or particularly a dead white male writer, on a pedestal, we fail to be able to relate to his experiences, to his cultural contributions, and then we sell ourselves short. You know, it was not only his duty, as he saw it throughout his life, to continuously reevaluate and change course, but it is also ours. And I think that that's something that has been woefully missing from the fabric of our society for quite some time now.
I'll just say something really quick, because I'm very curious to hear what you both have to say about this. But when we first started laying out the story for this film, way back before we even had a lot of interviews shot or a lot of footage shot, we took his story, we researched it very, very carefully, and then we had episode 1 when we built the story in the editing room. It was 2.5 hours long for episode 1. Episode 2 was about 4 hours long. And episode 3, what I think, Chris and I both think, is one of the most fascinating episodes, because you know nothing about him from after he leaves Walden Pond. Most people don't. That was 5.5 hours long. And the point I'm trying to make is that there was so much brilliant information, and there was so much that we wanted to say about this great man, this great, complicated man, that the nature of filmmaking, the nature of PBS saying you get 1 hour increment time slots, the budget that we have to operate, you know, if you make a longer film, it's a bigger budget. So we have all these limitations and considerations, but the most important thing is we wanted to do exactly what Jeff had referred to, I believe all of you did, an introduction to Thoreau. So we had to lose so many darlings on the editing room floor that it just became almost, you know, we had to become numb to it because we didn't have a choice. But my quick answer, as far as a specific, Death of a Pine. Sorry, I stole it. I'll let Susan describe it, and you may have something else to add, but it is a beautiful piece of writing, and it still hurts me that we couldn't fit it in and get all the balance of all the different story threads, and have the arc of each episode still be intact. It just was too much. So yeah, it's, you know, it's heartbreaking, but it's also very rewarding to be sitting here and hearing the applause from you, hearing the comments from the three of you. It's very humbling that we were able to do honor to not only all of your scholarship, but also to honor this man that has been kind of forgotten about in American literature to a large degree by a general audience.
So I think you're getting a little taste of what it is to be a producer versus directors. You notice that they're giving me the very hard task of telling you all of the bad things that we left out.
And why?
She did that a lot.
I did. So all the things that we miss that are no longer in the film. How much time do we have?
Well, just to be clear, I asked each of you to just name one sacrifice, and I think we've only heard one, which is the oak tree.
death of
maybe
Pine.
one of you or one of our scholars could tell the audience what that episode is and why
Sure.
it's so painful to have left it out.
Sure. Well, when we first started on the project, we had hoped that we would not just have an episode 3, but an episode 3 and 4. So for a long time, some of us hoped that. So for a long time, I think episode 3 was much longer than it should have been. And that's because we're packing almost 15 years into 15 very fertile years into 1 hour. So we lost a lot of things that we cared deeply about. I know we wanted to expand on Ellery Channing's relationship with Thoreau, which was so meaningful for both of them. We wanted to spend more time with beautiful passages, like Death of a Pine, which is essentially Henry is seated on Fairhaven Hill, watching this century pine, 100 feet tall, be cut down for lumber. And it's just the most moving thing, in which he talks about the tree falling to his death, enrobed in a green mantle like a warrior. And how the lumbermen have laid waste the sky, because this tree will no longer be in the air for us to see. So absolutely beautiful passage. Another beautiful passage, many of you know it, the last 3 paragraphs of the essay Walking, which is possibly some of the most beautiful prose written in the English language. I encourage you all to read that. But I also think that we wanted to spend more time on Henry's death and his illness, because he suffered a lot in the last 5 or 6 years of his life. He had tuberculosis affecting his strength in his legs for a long time, and he actually got over that. And then only later had his final bout with tuberculosis. But I did bring a little quote to read, just in case we had this opportunity. And this is from his journal after he's recovered that strength in his legs. And I think it just tells us a little bit about him, and this is something that is sad to me that got left out. And many of you know this. Give me the old familiar walk, post office and all, with this ever new self, with this infinite expectation and faith, which does not know when it is beaten. And then later he says, I will take another walk to the cliff, another row on the river, another skate on the meadow, be out in the first snow, associate with the winter birds. Here I am at home, in the bare and bleached crust of the earth. I recognize my friend. Just beautiful. So, as you can see, there was a lot of great stuff. So it was really, really hard to make these choices. But hopefully, if we've done our job well, it will be up to these viewers to discover these beautiful moments for themselves.
It's up to us to open the book and read.
Well, with your permission, then I think we will open it to the audience. And I would ask if you can possibly ask a question. That would be wonderful. So please raise a hand if you have a question for either our filmmakers or our scholars, mics will come around. Am I to call on people, Lori? Is that the... Okay, Lori's just going to hand the mic around, so I see your hands.
Thank you very much. I love the second episode. I've seen most of the first, but I haven't seen the third yet. But I have a question. Why did you leave out the part that he was engaged for one night, and he did maybe fall in love a little bit with Ralph Waldo Emerson's wife, Lydia? And I just, it's great to talk about him as a poet and a scientist and a wonderful person and all this, but most people do fall in love with somebody in their life. And I wonder, romance, at least to me, is a very important part of life. So I'm just wondering if there was a tiny part of his life that reflects this. Why didn't you talk about this? This is curious to me.
Chris?
Wonderful question. As Erik had mentioned, alluded to, there is only so much real estate that we have, right? So we, not as scholars, not as historians, but as storytellers, we have to make, continuously throughout the process, have to make decisions about how to continue the pace and pacing of the film to, of course, educate, but also to entertain. We had cut together in one of the earlier versions, as Erik again had mentioned, the much longer episodes. We did have a scene in there that spoke about how he and his brother John both fell in love with the same woman, both asked for her hand in marriage, and they were both turned down sort of out of hand, partially for being transcendental. But ultimately, as we're screening the film over the various versions of the edit, we realized that that scene sort of stuck out. Certainly romance was not a large part of Henry's life, but more of a blip. And so that we made the decision to unfortunately have to sacrifice that scene and that conversation for others.
Thank you.
Thank
Hi.
you.
I'll stand. Thank you so much. This was beautiful. My name's Annabelle. So there's so much going on in our world, as we all know. And there is so much to believe in and hope for. And I do feel that, I'm 28, and I feel that there's a spiritual revival going on, at least in my generation, of people waking up. And it feels like it feels honestly like nature is talking to us and saying, it's time to change and wake up to me. Because I am your mother, and I am more powerful than you. I think the coronavirus pandemic was a piece to that, and it gave us much reflection as a species to think about what are we doing here all together as a collective? How can we change our way? And these themes have been in my mind for many years since the pandemic, and I'm a writer and passionate about Transcendentalism. And this film feels like, because it is taking ground and getting attention to Henry and the way his philosophies and the ways in which in 2026 we can implement them into our daily lives. I guess, how do you connect this film to what is going on right now? What can we as a public take from this narrative and this story and then move into our lives, daily lives, and in the future to creating a better world? And where do you see it going, and what impact do you see it having on everyone? Because I do see that this can help a lot. Yes, thank you.
I'm going to say something very quickly before I'm interested to hear what you say. The part that you mentioned about your generation, I want to focus on very quickly. My daughter, Erik Ewers, worked on this film from beginning to end. She did not work for me. She worked for the producers and other people. It's very important to her.
I was really hard on her, very hard on her.
But Raman, could you please stand up? Yes. Raman was an intern on our project, and yes, I want, absolutely. And what I'd like to point out is that we engaged with people who are much younger than we are, because it was so critical that we made a film that was relatable to younger generations. We did not want it to be an ultra-cerebral kind of film. We wanted it to be an experiential film where you go along with Thoreau in his life. We don't point arrows and say, you need to know this is very important. We let you come to your own conclusions, your own revelations, as he does. That's called relatability. And when you have relatability with your viewer, then you have the opportunity, to give them something to think about. Like I said about I hope the film is a reflection on yourself, because we give you the opportunity to think for yourself. And Raman will attest that we listened very, very carefully to everything you had to say. And my daughter and other young people that worked on the film. And we are indebted to the contribution that you made and others, so thank you.
That was not quick.
It's quicker than you.
I have a question over here.
Hold on, Diana, let's just make sure there are no other responses to that last question.
I would just say that I hope that this film affects the world going forward in three different ways. One is I hope everyone watches it and then picks up, Walden or Walking or Civil Disobedience and starts to read. The Journal would be fabulous. But also I know that Walden Woods Project and PBS Learning is doing a lot to get this material into the public schools, which is wonderful. I think 20-somethings are not known for their PBS watching. However, teachers, K through 12 teachers, are very much known for using PBS Learning, and especially Ken Burns in the classroom. So thousands of young people will be exposed to Henry in the way that maybe we used to be more when we read his books, but hopefully in a more accessible way. And the third thing is that I know the center is very much grappling with this right now as well, how to get Transcendentalism out there in a way that is real. And so this project going forward, I think, is going to do a lot as well. So I hope that helps.
One very super quick thing is I've taught Walden for almost 40 years. It reads differently now for young people. They're responding, they're open to it. I think the pandemic, I think the climate crisis, I think the technology overwhelm means they're ready for this message. And I bring it to students who are deep into English literature, students who are absolutely not, and it works. They're paying attention.
And I just want to add in that aside from Walden and Civil Disobedience and all of that, the most important thing that I think Thoreau shows us is the power of the individual. And so you have Henry David Thoreau living in the mid-19th century when you have the horrors of enslavement everywhere, and here you have this individual who was a staunch abolitionist. There's no way he's going to end slavery. Not paying your taxes is not going to end slavery. There's literally nothing this one man can do. But that didn't stop him. He's part of the Underground Railroad. He helped individuals. And so he does what he can for one person. And I think, particularly in a time when the world is so overwhelming and we feel so like we just want to throw our hands up and say, oh, well, to hell with it. I'm sorry, this is divinity school, I shouldn't say that.
No, we talk about hell. It's okay.
To heck with it. So just remember that you can help one person. And when you used to talk to students, you say, if somebody's just sitting alone outside, go be their friend, or get lunch for somebody. There's this story of Thoreau when the Irish were building the railroads near Walden Pond, and there was a young Irish boy who didn't have enough clothing. He was probably not going to survive the winter. And what Thoreau did, this person with very little money, is he went and bought a coat for this young Irish boy so he could survive. That's what we need to do. So we're not going to change the world overnight, but we can help the person sitting next to us and make a difference.
Diana, please.
Yes, a quick question, really, which is, I haven't seen the first episode, but I was sort of surprised that this one left out the sort of questions that Thoreau asks by way of social critique. Questions about what it means to build a house or have a farm or clothe yourself when you're always going to have new clothes, but you're not a good new wearer of clothes. And I remember, especially because I was a young person starting with a mortgage, and the line when he says, "And when the farmer has got his house, he may not be the richer but the poorer for it, and it be that the house has got him." And those sort of critiques, I think, are all the way through his writing. But here it felt as if well, maybe it's because it's all about transcendentalism, but hey, I think the questions he asked us really resonate.
I promise the quick answer. Episode 1 is all about Thoreau coming into a world, growing up and realizing all of the quiet desperation of society, that we're pursuing excess, surplus. He sees the corruption in government. He sees so much. And a lot of people have criticized is not the right word, but they say episode 1 is difficult in the sense that it doesn't have some grand arc of a story. That's because without episode 1, you cannot understand Thoreau in episode 2, which is all about transformation. He's not a good writer at the end of episode 1. He's failing as a writer. He doesn't know what to do with his life. So episode 2 is transition. Episode 1 is him coming into, that's why the episode is called Who Are We? Speaking about him and society. And then episode 3, he takes his transformation from Walden with him. So I think if the answer is if you watch the entire series each hour, you'll see the progression. It may not have everything you want, but it will 100% address what you're talking about.
Thank you.
Can I just make a side comment to that? That people make a lot of jokes about how hard the economy chapter is to read and how much people hate it, and I think it is difficult. It's a difficult chapter for my students, for instance, and that's where the questions first get raised. So just bouncing off of that to bring it back to your question, since I chose to shut up and not respond so we could get to Diana's question. I feel like one thing that I've learned to do as a teacher is to break economy into very short passages, and it's kind of a sad commentary on it's hard to read, and then have my students take different responsibility for different pieces of it. And when I first did it that way a few years ago, suddenly they were like, oh my God, he's talking about fast fashion. Suddenly they could relate. So I think this is one of these issues where, at least in the reading Thoreau, and I think it's another kind of challenge in the film, that the 19th century diction is really difficult. And I just fell off my chair when I first heard Jeff Goldblum, because before that, we weren't hearing him in earlier versions that we got to hear and see, because he really somehow makes that diction understandable the way a good actor makes Shakespeare understandable. So that helped enormously. But I think those very critical questions, they're dealt with in the economy chapter, and that's scary for a lot of people. So you have to figure out how to ask those questions more simply so that people are bringing them into this current moment.
Friends, colleagues, we have just a few minutes left, and we have 2 questions that I'd like to end with. So we have to practice economy, okay? So there's a question over here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a quick question. So you had these very lengthy 3 episodes. We have, with writers, we have their journals, we have their notes. We don't just have their published materials. Do you archive that so that, and in today's digital world, couldn't you throw that up on a web and say, this is our raw material? So, thank you.
I feel your eyes. So there are several ways that we can go about this. Typically we do create DVDs, which a lot of the times have DVD extras where we're able to include excerpted materials. it would be really wonderful. I mean, this film, starting upon broadcast on Monday, is living, free. They call it free video on demand. It's living on pbs.org for streaming services for streaming capabilities for a month. And given this new environment of streaming platforms and distribution, yes, there are certainly ways that we could put more out. It takes a Herculean effort for us to just create the 3 one-hour episodes, and we've just finished and just premiered it. So hopefully we're able to do something like that further down the line, because to everybody's point up here, there's just so much that we weren't able to include that is just brilliant.
I also know that some of that material we're working with Walden Woods to put online. I hope that we might be able to share some maybe with the Transcendentalist project here too, potentially going forward. Hopefully a lot of that material will get out.
Yeah, a united front with all the Thoreauvians is a necessary avenue for us. And the only thing I wanted to add is that when the film airs, it's just the beginning for us. It's not the end.
A final question.
Yeah.
Here, sir.
This is an appropriate final question. I'm wondering what you think Henry might have thought about this film. He would say things like, "Let your life be a friction against the machine," and he believed that telegraphs were of no importance because what if Maine had nothing to say to Texas? So what would we have thought of a bunch of individuals walking around with cameras and lenses and other such devices trying to encompass the breadth of his life?
I would like to know what the 3 of you think on that front. We're too biased.
Yeah, that's
Thoreau wanted to be in the woods and meditate and think, and he wanted to talk and be heard. I think he'd be delighted, in short. I think he wanted to get his message out. And if we take this and read the books, then mission accomplished.
I also think that Thoreau didn't, like Emerson, did not want disciples. They wanted everybody to go out and live their own lives. So I personally don't know if he would love the fact that we're all sitting here talking about him and watching a film about him, or should we be out there living our lives?
I'll put it in a sideways way since I didn't want to take the bait, but I really feel like over many decades that Thoreau is my friend. I have no idea if he would feel that way about me. And that's why I don't think I'm going to take the bait on the film at large. But I do think the call to wake up is very clear in the film and is very clear in Thoreau. So those things are very much in sync with each other.
I also think he would love the cameras. He was fascinated by technology. And I think he would, if he could just plop here, I think he would want to know how it works, all the details of it. So, who knows?
And also maybe just wonder, there's 3 photographs of him taken by the same photographer. Maybe he would have posed differently or showed a side view or so. We only had a drawing of him in his 20s or early 30s, a supposed image drawn of him from his Harvard graduation. It's very challenging to tell the story of a person when you have 2 photos, in essence. 3 photos and 1 drawing. Not easy.
I think he'd be thrilled that the Red Sox are currently winning 5-2 in opening day in Fenway. Sorry, my phone kept dropping. It happened before because it buzzed and, yeah. Apologies.
There's the Telegraph with that important news. Let's take this opportunity to thank our filmmakers and our scholars. Thank you all.